Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our fourth and final installment of Enabling Conversations with our thought leader and wisdom guide, Colin Kuhn. I'm your host and wisdom guide, Momoloto, and it's really great to have you here. I know we've journeyed for the last 4 weeks around enabling conversations, and today we've got that last puzzle piece in this series, enabling conversations. And I think before we get started, I just wanted to say, for those that have been with us for the last 3 weeks, the recordings are available on our YouTube video, so you can go and actually look at those at your own time. You can also go to our website, www.boundlesswisdom.com, to learn more about who we are and what we do. I know I've given a bit of an introduction in terms of who we are in the last videos, but this time I really would like to encourage people to visit our website so they can learn about who we are as Boundless Wisdom. And to officially welcome our guest, Colin Kuhn. Colin, welcome for the final installment of Enabling Conversations. How are you this evening?
I'm remarkably well. As we kind of roll into December, it's been a very busy, Dietmar was saying earlier, excuse me, it's been a very busy year and it's finished busy. So I'm going to be very pleased to actually take a step back from a busy world and get my breath and take a bit of time out. Yeah, thanks for having me back, Amol.
All right, so just another quick intro on who Colin is. Colin is a Commensa accredited practitioner, and he's also an executive coach and a wisdom guide here at Boundless Wisdom. He has more than 30 years of facilitation, coaching, and that's who we are dealing with. That's who we are in the midst of this evening. So Colin, based on the last few weeks that we've had together, I'm just going to share my screen and I'm just going to allow you to just take us to how we can actually, I'm just waiting for, wait a minute, there we go. So I just would like for you to take us through, for example, where the conversation started, but more importantly, what is it that we can learn from today? Because I know today that we are covering the 5-step process in terms of having courageous or tough conversation, but please do take us back to where it started.
All right, so I think the starting point for me is just this realization that we have conversations all day, every day, in a number of different contexts. And our conversations, or the way we have conversations, really is how the world experiences us, how we're engaging with the world, how we show up for the world, how the world experiences us. And I think that it's quite an unusual topic in some ways, because when you think about having a conversation about conversations, most people say that, we've been having conversations for a long time. Why a program on conversations? And as I said in previous sessions, you only have to look around you to see just how badly conversations are held and how we show up in these conversations. And enabling conversations are a unique kind of conversation. They are those conversations where we can enable growth in the relationship, growth in ourselves, growth in other people. We are enabling and empowering ourselves, others, and the relationship in some way, just by the way we show up in those conversations, and also what it is that we do in those conversations. And they are all around us. We are constantly faced with these opportunities to have these conversations. And the examples that I've given, from a work environment is when, colleagues come and ask you for advice or for assistance or for help. Team members need your help for something. When children are coming to you to help with homework. A friend comes and asks you for advice. When people are grappling to move forward, they're stuck in a career, stuck in a relationship, struggling with some kind of issue, struggling to make a decision. All of those are opportunities for us to engage with them in such a way that it enables and empowers them to come out the other side, having moved forward, having gained something and been enabled. And all the way along through the various days that we've had, or the various sessions we've had, I've also talked about this idea of having conversations with ourselves. We can apply exactly the same principles to how we have conversations with ourselves when we are stuck, when we're struggling to make decisions. when we need help or we need assistance, when we're feeling like we can't cope, how do we have those conversations with ourselves? How do we show up in those conversations? And it's quite a strange idea to have a conversation with yourself. Means there's almost two of you, me having a conversation with myself, because very often it's ourself that gets in the way of us moving forward, of us making decisions, of us engaging in things that are scary or unknown or uncontrollable. So we really need to have these enabling conversations with ourselves. And the better we become at having them with ourselves, the better we can have them with other people. So that's really kind of the background. And it, from an origin perspective, it really has its origins in my studying and learning as a coach, learning the skills of enabling conversations, because that's what a coaching session is. It's or a coaching session is an enabling conversation. Coaching is a series of enabling conversations. And I thought, it'd be really cool if we could start sharing some of those skills and insights with other people in multitude of environments to be able to give them the skills to have these enabling conversations. So more, that's really kind of where it all started.
And then you've also told us about the stories that we tell ourselves and how those actually impact on us being able to have conversations. Please take us through that.
All right, so in the second session that we had, so that's what, 3 weeks ago, we looked at what we've called the foundation stones of enabling conversations. There are these 3 key learnings or insights that we need to have and we need to engage with before we start thinking about how we go about having those conversations. And what I'm going to try and do, Amor, is I'm going to rather make it a lot more practical and a less theoretical. I'm actually going to apply exactly this principle, which is one of the key stones or the foundation stones of enabling conversations. I'm actually going to apply this to tough conversations. So hold on to the screen for a moment. Just the principle behind it, for those who haven't seen it, is this idea that our behavior, our actions and our reactions and our responses to the world around us, what we do and don't do, what we say and don't say, are driven by how we feel. Sorry, emotions drive our behavior. If we're angry, we behave in an angry way. If we're feeling sad or threatened, we hide or withdraw. If we're feeling happy, we jump up and down with joy. So it's kind of emotions drive behaviors. And how we feel is very often driven by what we think. So our thinking drives our feelings and our feelings drive our behaviors. And I've called these our stories because they are almost like a story that plays itself out in our heads, like a narrative that is playing. It's what we're thinking about ourselves, others, and the world around us. And depending on what we think, it shapes how we feel and ultimately how we behave. And so when new experiences come along, immediately our brain goes, oh, what do we know about the situation? It's trying to make sense of or attribute meaning to the world around us. We develop beliefs about ourselves, about other people, and about the world and about that situation. And depending on the story we tell, will shape how we feel and ultimately how we respond. And so the point of change, the point of enablement, if you like to use the language of enabling conversations, the point of enablement is really the stories that we tell. How do we actually be aware of those stories and start challenging some of those stories that we're telling ourselves so that we feel differently and we show up then differently in the world around us. We behave differently. So let's apply that to tough conversations, because tough conversations or courageous conversations are particularly difficult. They have a unique difficultness. Oh, that's not a good word. A difficulty about them, all right? And I kind of thought to myself, all right, so how do you position this? And I think the way in which to position it is to think about, if you use the word difficult, it's a difficult conversation or a conversation that requires us to be courageous. Courageous means that in the face of fear, in the face of risk, in the face of threat, we show courage. Fear, threat, vulnerability sits at the heart. Those are the emotions that make it an uncomfortable conversation, a tough conversation. Can you hear the words that I'm using? Tough, uncomfortable. Those are emotions. So if we take a step backwards and we say, okay, fine, so what is the story that we are telling ourselves that is causing us to feel the emotion of discomfort, feeling worried about having the conversation, feeling anxious about having the conversation, feeling ashamed about having the conversation, feeling embarrassed or guilty about having the conversation. All of those words are emotions. And one of the key, not only, this is one of the foundation stones, but one of the other foundation stones is the starting point for all human change is awareness. So we need to become aware of when we are faced with a situation where we have to have a courageous, a tough conversation, what are the stories that pop up into our minds about the conversation, about the content, about the person that we're going to be talking to, about the situation and about ourselves that is causing us to feel the discomfort, that is causing us to need to be courageous because we're feeling threatened, feeling vulnerable, feeling ashamed, feeling guilty. What are the stories? Okay. And once again, I'm going to ask those who are listening in just to think about a conversation that you are currently putting off, a conversation that you know you need to have. You know it's a crucially important conversation, but you've been putting it off for some time now. And I'd like you just to hold on to that conversation in your mind. And let's apply this model to that. So every time you think about having that conversation, or you're faced with an opportunity to have that conversation, how does it make you feel? What is the overarching feeling that you kind of sit with? Is it dread? Is it fear? Is it worry? Is it shame or embarrassment? Is it anxiety? What is that emotion? And then take a step back and say to yourself, all right, so that's curious. When I'm faced with the situation and this person or that conversation I need to have, and I'm feeling those feelings, I wonder what's going on. What am I telling myself about this conversation? And just doing that, what it does is it creates awareness. It starts off with that starting point of change is awareness. That's interesting. Those are the kinds of conversations that are coming up for me, that are causing me to feel that are causing me to behave in a way that avoids the conversation. All right, because I've been avoiding it up till now. That's a behavior driven by fear that's driven by a story. Okay. And I jotted down some ideas as to what are the kinds of stories that we tell ourselves when we are faced with tough conversations or courageous conversations, conversations where we need to be courageous. And these are the kinds of things that might be coming into your mind. I don't want to upset the other person. And they may get emotional during the conversation, and I don't think I could cope with them bursting into tears or getting emotional. Maybe I'm making too much out of the situation. It's really not that important. What if I hear something that I know, but I've been hiding away for a long time or denying, and it comes up in this conversation? All right. I really can't face the possibility that I might hear something harsh or hear a harsh truth. What happens if I open up a can of worms? What will they think of me if I get emotional during the conversation? Okay. Is this really the right time? Maybe there's a better time to be doing this. Maybe I've chosen the wrong time, and this person's too busy, or they too involved with something, and there's a better time. Can you hear? All of that is thinking. All of that's a conversation that's going on. And I just want you to think for your moment. Just take a moment for yourselves and say, you know, if I just reflect on that conversation that I know I need to be having with my mother-in-law, I know I need to be having with my boss, that conversation I need to have with my teenager, with my partner. How do you feel about the thought of having the conversation? And just ask yourself, what are the kinds of what is the story that's going on in your head? And we then have the ability to start challenging those stories. And that was the second point in that particular foundation stone, is once we have awareness, we can then start making choices. We can't choose unless we're aware. So just being aware that, that's interesting. I'm starting to feel really anxious about, and this is the kinds of things I'm telling myself, I'm worried about, I'm thinking about, I believe is going to happen. I can now start to challenge that. Is that true? How do I know? Am I jumping to conclusions? Have I made assumptions? Am I basing what's going to happen in this conversation on all the previous conversations I've had? And who says it's going to be different? And just that questioning, that genuine curiosity around our stories, our narrative, what pops out of our subconscious is the starting point of us starting to change. Well, maybe this isn't true. Maybe I have made a whole bunch of assumptions. How will I know if that's true unless I have the conversation? I won't. Just in the 10 minutes prior to getting ready for this, and it's amazing how kind of things happen. Just I'm sitting in a holiday home at the moment that we've rented out as a family, and I'm just looking to my right at the moment, and there's a copy of Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. And it was clearly there for a reason, because when I thought about this, challenging our own stories, he says that, the power of now is this ability to stay in the present and not in the past or in the future. And I think in tough conversations is very much, it's tough because we remember previous conversations that have gone wrong in the past. So we live in the past, or conversations with this person where it's gone wrong, or where we've tried to raise this topic and it's gone wrong. Or what we're doing is we're thinking into the future. What happens if they get upset? What happens if it damages the relationship? What happens if...
What is that?
Oh.
No, but he said I'm not allowed.
Sure, if you could put your microphone on.
No.
If someone could just mute.
They said I
us,
must
please.
only start having it tomorrow.
Come on.
Yeah. So
Amal,
I'm
can you
going to
hear
have four.
I'm just going to mute that participant quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apologies for that.
It's Nico. All right, sorry for that. So really what we're doing is our minds, when we are faced with a challenging situation, we immediately think into the future of what might go wrong, or we think into the past, what has gone wrong before, in our desperate need to find out and to mitigate risk, mitigate the uncontrollables. And what it does is it creates a whole bunch of unnecessary emotion that causes us to avoid or have those conversations badly. So the starting point is to challenge those stories, know about the stories, be emotionally intelligent, know how you're feeling in that situation, and know that the story is just a story. It's nothing more than a story, and we can change that story, and I'll show you how as we journey along. So really challenging, and we challenge our stories by asking challenging questions of ourselves. We challenge our beliefs. Just like when we're having a conversation with someone else, we help them think about the beliefs that they have and ask them to challenge those beliefs. Is that true? Could there be a different truth? Is what it is that you're anticipating seriously going to happen, and how will you know that? What are you expecting? What are you being so right about? All the things that we talked about in our last session. All right, so this tool or this slide here is very, very applicable to courageous conversations. Amal, any questions from your side? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so before we move on, I just want to encourage the participants to please put any comments or inputs in the chat box for us, so that Colin and I can look at them and maybe respond as and when we get to them. But more importantly, Colin, you mentioned about the stories that we tell ourselves, and that it starts with awareness. So once we are aware, and now we have the courage, or at least we now have the ability to go and have the conversation, what would those steps look like that would enable us to have the conversation? So what are those building blocks?
All right, so if you go on to your next slide, you'll be reminded, sorry, Amor, just to take a step backwards quickly. So the three, for those of you who haven't seen the three foundation stones, they are this understanding that all change happens with awareness. Once we're aware, we can choose, we can make choices to do something differently. We then commit to action. We go and do those actions, we reflect on the outcome. So that's the one. This is the second one on the screen at the moment, this idea that experiences are filtered through our stories. We have stories about the world around us. It makes us feel a certain way and behave in a certain way. And then the three pillars, or the three most important skills of enabling conversations: our ability to ask tough questions, courageous questions, to listen to the answers and to listen very carefully, and silence. Enabling conversations and questioning skills are about moving another person to silence, to get them to think about something they haven't thought about before. All right, so what then are the building blocks? If you go on to the next slide, Amor. And you can literally just tick through them because I'm going to just touch on them as we go along. So we said there are 11 building blocks that sit on those foundation stones. The first one is to be clear about your intentions, and I'll show you how we do that within tough conversations or courageous conversations. We need to be 100% present, and when we talk about being present, it means not tuning into all the noise that's going on in our own minds, but being present in the moment, in the now, in the power of now of that conversation. Not worrying about what questions are coming, not worried about what's just been said, but being in the moment. Okay, engaging immediately, and we'll talk about that. Showing genuine curiosity by asking questions. We have another person with their microphone on.
Thank you very much.
Remaining solution focused, particularly in tough conversations, creating safety, avoiding attachment, not rescuing the other person. So often we don't have tough conversations with someone because we're actually rescuing them. So I don't want to talk to my employee who keeps on arriving because I feel a little bit embarrassed and I'm a little uncomfortable. And what happens if they're going through a tough time? But in actual fact, what we are we're rescuing them from something that they should be doing by not confronting them on that issue. And we then end up being the victims of our own rescuing. Remaining conscious at all times during these conversations, committing to action, and then taking responsibility. All right, so let's think about, so how do you actually apply these? Because they're very useful. They're 11 tools or insights that you could apply to enabling conversations. And in our last session, I said to you, I can almost guarantee you when you have a conversation that goes wrong, when you're sitting in a meeting and a conversation goes wrong, when you're having a conversation with your in-laws and something goes wrong, or with your partner, or with a friend, I can almost guarantee you that one of these elements is not present in that conversation. So it becomes a very useful checkpoint or a list of checkpoints in order to assess where conversations have gone wrong and where it is that we can start working harder in order to improve the quality of conversations. And so back to our whole point of awareness. What this wheel does is it provides you with an awareness of what's important, an awareness of where you might have gone wrong, and therefore you can choose to do it differently. What role does personality and or culture play? Wow, that's a huge question. I'm not sure if you can switch your microphone on. I'd love to hear what's just a little bit more about that question, so we can just sharpen the question.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me, Colin?
Yes, I can.
It's maybe more culture than personality. I'm growing up in an environment where children are seen and not heard. Certain cultures that are dismissive of genders, or I'm just wondering about how big a role does that play in terms of what you were saying earlier about being courageous and stepping into that self-speak around, thinking about how to prepare for that conversation.
All right, so without going into too much detail, our past, everything that we've experienced from the time that we were born, everything we've experienced, everything we've learned, everything that we have been taught and our upbringing, our education, everything that we've ever been through sits in our subconscious. And it's like a giant database of our life story. And so when new situations come along, our subconscious immediately throws up a narrative, a story that is linked to our past experience of that situation. All right. And the principle here is, and in coaching, I do a lot of work around this idea that, our past only affects our future to the extent we allow it to. And what that means is that past, we can choose whether we buy into that story from this point onwards or not. And that is a choice. So I choose to adhere or to hold on to those cultural norms, or I don't. I choose no longer. That no longer works for me anymore. I don't buy that anymore. And therefore, I'm going to consciously choose to do something that's out of my comfort zone, that's been my past, and experience what the difference is and reflect on that. And that then becomes my new way of being. So you're almost authoring a new way of being. And it's really at a point in time where you can say, okay, fine. At this point, I realize that there's a whole bunch of stuff maybe in my past that is continuing to affect my future. And this is an opportunity for me to be enabled to make a conscious choice to change that. And while it's going to be tough, I'm going to have to be courageous in doing that. Courageous in the conversation with myself, courageous in stepping into the action around doing it. And yeah, particularly around tough conversations, we shouldn't be disrespectful to our elders, and therefore I can't confront them. I can't have tough conversations with them. I can't hold them accountable because they are older than me and I need to be respectful. Seriously? All right. And how well is that working for you? That belief that yes has been part of, and I get where it's coming from, but if that's no longer working for you, what choices are you going to make going forward? Because it is a choice at the end of the day. You can consciously choose to do it differently. It is just a belief that can be challenged. So I hope that kind of gives a bit of an answer. All right, so let's move on as to how do you have these tough conversations? What is the process that you need to go through? Because I think that's really where the tacky hits the tar. And the first kind of component that I'd like to talk about is just how we prepare for conversations. Because I don't think we do enough preparation for tough conversations, for courageous conversations. But we've got to be quite careful how we prepare for them. Because if we overanalyze and we get into analysis paralysis about the conversation we're about to have, we can actually trip over ourselves. We can actually get in our own way. So what are the kind of key principles here? Number one, timing is everything. Now, in the first session that we had, we talked about a gentleman by the name of Joseph Grenny, someone who I really encourage you and invite you to go and Google Joseph Grenny, Grenny, Grenny. And Joseph Grenny is kind of one of those gurus around conversations. And he said that you can measure the health of a relationship by measuring the average lag in time between a situation arising and the conversation happening. And what he is a proponent of is we need to have conversations immediately. All right. When those situations come up, we need to lean into the discomfort and we need to have those conversations. So when performance issues surface, we don't need to wait for the performance review to happen in 3 months' time. We need to sit down with that individual and engage with them immediately, as tough as it is. All right, we need to, and he says that you can measure the quality of the relationship by how quickly we step into that. However, I'm not sure that that's a universally true principle, because I think there are some situations where when emotions are heightened, when people are anxious, worried, frightened, ashamed, embarrassed, guilty, all of those heightened emotions, uncomfortable emotions, scientists have actually proven that as those emotions increase, our level of rationality decreases, because all the oxygen and glucose rushes out of our rational brain into the part of our brain that is designed to protect us, to defend us. And so when people are anxious, worried, frightened, all of those emotions, it is not a good idea to engage in an enabling conversation with them, because they will be irrational. They're going to be spending a huge amount of their energy, oxygen and glucose in their brain in a defense mechanism and in their defenses, in what Freud called the ego defenses. All right. So we may need, when heightened times of emotion, we need to step away and actually have the conversation at a time of neutrality. So my principle is, don't have enabling conversations in the heat of battle. Wait for a time when you can actually quietly sit and reflect on what has happened post the drama of the situation. All right. However, if you wait too long, what happens is we then start creating a whole bunch of story in our heads. That story grows, we generate lots of evidence, and we actually fall over ourselves. We trip over ourselves. The second point is to avoid personal attacks. And when I talk about personal attack, I don't mean an abusive personal attack on the individual. Just the way in which we phrase something can make the other person feel like they are being attacked, that they are the problem. And so how we language a problem, how we raise the problem with the other person, needs to come from a place of, we have a problem, not you are the problem. There's something that we need to tackle. We need to work on this to find a way forward. We need to find a solution. It's us against the problem. I'm on your side to deal with the problem over there, not you are the problem. All right? So we've got to be quite careful on how we position a tough situation. A child that is behaving badly, is undisciplined, not doing their homework, an employee who constantly arrives late or is not performing up to scratch. Actually, as a manager, it's not them that's the problem. Both of you have a problem because both of you would like performance to be as good as it can be. You have a vested interest in getting them to perform at their full potential, and they want to be performing at their full potential, surely. And so how can we deal with the challenge that's facing you guys? And if we position it in that way, it takes so much of the sting out of the conversation, because it feels like I have a collaborator, someone's enabling me, someone's working with me to deal with the challenge that I'm facing, as opposed to I am the challenge, you are the problem. So we be very careful of using language like you are, you never, you're to blame, why don't you ever? All of that stuff immediately provokes defense reaction in the other person. Heightened anxiety, increased defensiveness, and then you're dealing with an irrational person. Next one is we've got to be careful of expectations. This is a topic I can spend 2 hours talking about, but I'm just going to give you a sense of what I mean by this. Imagine a person is going in to have a conversation with their boss because they feel that they are not being paid enough, that they should be getting an increase, that they've worked hard enough to get the increase, and they've got to have this tough conversation. And just the thought of going into my boss's office and going to have that conversation, oh my goodness, what is he going to say? And what happens if he gets upset? And who am I to be expecting an increase? The world is really, so we've got a whole bunch of narrative going on. Shh, quiet. Okay. But what happens is immediately, because we as human beings are expectation machines, we expect things to go right. We expect the weather to be nice. We expect conversations to go right. We create an expectation. And the problem with expectations is that when reality doesn't meet the expectation, we then are disappointed. Now, was it because the conversation didn't go right, or was it because we went in with an expectation that it should have been different? And so what we need to do is, as much as possible, drop our expectations that the conversation will be anything other than what it is. Tough. But if you're conscious about it and you consciously choose to say, hey, I'm just going to go and have that conversation, and it will be what it will be, and I'll deal with whatever comes along when it comes along. Because if I go in with an expectation that they're going to say yes, that they're going to be agreeable to giving me an increase, and I don't get the reaction that then I'm going to be disappointed and frustrated and angry. And was that caused by the conversation, or was it caused by an expectation that I had before I went in? And so we need to drop our expectations or manage our expectations very carefully. All right. The conversation will be with what it is. And I'm just going to show up 100%, make it the very best it can be, in the hope that it will be extraordinary, but not in the expectation that there'll be anything. All right. Next one is to be 100% clear on your intentions. And you'll see the key starting blocks, or the insights or skills around enabling conversations, is to know what your intention is, particularly in tough conversations. If when this conversation is a tough conversation and you're feeling embarrassed, or you're feeling ashamed, or you're feeling angry and frustrated, and you now need to have a tough conversation with this person because you're angry and they need to come right, or you're feeling vulnerable by whatever the situation is, all right? We need to be very clear in our own minds before we start the conversation. What is my intention? What do I want to achieve in this conversation? All right. I want to help this person grow and develop. I want them to perform at their full potential. I would like to grow the relationship. I'd like to find a solution that is workable. That's being clear in your mind as to what the enabling intention is. If you don't consciously do it, your ego will immediately create its own intention to blame, to punish, to threaten, to prove that you're right, to bombard the person with evidence as to why you are right and they are wrong, to make the person feel bad for what it is that they've done. Because your ego is very good at generating its own intention. So we've got to consciously choose the intention, and as much as possible when we go into the conversation, expressing that intention. So that's point number 5, is declaring the intention for having the conversation. And once again, I remind you, I'm repeating what I said in our last session, by expressing the intention up front, does 2 things. Number 1, you're letting the person know that you are wanting to have an enabling conversation with them, one that's going to be helping find a solution that we can both work on, all right? So that's the first thing. So we're trying to diminish the level of anxiety, pull that fear factor down so that we deal with a rational person as a partner and a solution buddy or partner. The other advantage of declaring the intention is if you've declared the intention up front, my intention here is really to find a solution to help you grow, to find how we could not make those mistakes again, how we can prevent that situation from happening again. And I really want to explore some ways in which we can do that. If we make that up front, when the conversation goes pear-shaped, if it goes pear-shaped, if it becomes emotional, if it goes off track, we can always stop and say, oh, hold on a second. Can I just remind you what the intention is here? And I think we're actually wandering away from that intention. I genuinely want to find a solution, and yet we seem to be going into blame and reasons why things have gone wrong. Let's refocus. How can we move forward? What are we wanting to achieve? How can we prevent this happening? So it gives you an anchor to go back to when things go wrong. So particularly useful to know your intention, be clear on it, and make sure that you communicate it. Crispin, I guess being truthful and honest about your intention is important here. Absolutely. Authenticity is key to this whole process. You've got to show up authentically. And that authenticity might be engaging with the person and saying, yeah, in actual fact, I've been putting off this conversation for about 2 weeks now because I'm really feeling a little bit anxious about having it. I'm worried I'm going to be upsetting you. And my intention here is really to find a solution and to share with you where I'm at and to hear how you're seeing the situation. But I'd just like to share with you how I'm feeling before we start. And that's why I haven't approached you. You're putting it on the table because then that's authentic. That's real. And if anybody who's read Brené Brown, she says the only place of connection, the only place where true connection happens is a place of authenticity, when we can authentically share with the other person where we're at, how we're feeling, what we believe.
So Colin, I'm just thinking, you know, in instances where I've had to have a tough conversation, you know, part of my preparation would be looking at taking responsibility, or at least looking at what my contribution has been to where both, you know, myself and the other person are. And once I've gotten to that level of recognizing what my contribution is, tough as it may be, you know, what would be some of the steps that I can then, you know, follow through to make sure that it's not just an acknowledgement, it's not just a sense of awareness, but now it moves into action. So what is it that maybe I can do once I'm at that point?
I mean, it's such an interesting concept there, because if you have a look at the 11th cornerstone or building block of enabling conversations, it is taking responsibility, being responsible. So even in those times when we feel most hurt, frustrated, done down, threatened, people have treated us badly, we are the victims of circumstance, and we're going to now have the tough conversation. Even in those times, we hold responsibility, our ability to respond. How am I going to respond to what's happened to me? Because while I can't control what the world is doing to me and what they're saying to me, I can control how I respond to it. Respondability, I have the ability to respond. And therefore I carry some of that responsibility. And when we talk about having enabling conversations, particularly in tough conversations, courageous conversations, we are most required to say, and so how am I going to show up? How am I going to manage that part of me or part of the situation that I can be responsible for, respondable for? I can respond. effectively in an enabling way, rather than in a defensive, attacking, threatening, blaming way. Thanks, Amol. Great point. All right, so let's get on to the points. What are the 5 points around having enabling conversations? And I'm going to try and give you some examples once we've gone through it. But let me go through it first, just so you can get a sense of the flow of the process. And then we'll talk about some examples, and maybe 1 or 2 people can share with us challenging conversations they need to be having, and how we then can apply this to that. All right, so step number 1 is to take ownership of your experience of the situation. All right, so very often what we do when we go into a tough conversation, particularly when we're angry or upset or frustrated, and we feeling a bit put down, or we're feeling like we're the victim, is we immediately express what they've done to us. Okay, you did this, you did that, you're to blame for, why don't you ever? And what we need to do is we need to change that, and we need to take ownership of what we are experiencing, because that's our only truth. That's the only thing that's true for us, is what we experience. So the way in which we started out is, so what I'm experiencing is, and you might say, and it doesn't mean it's true. I'm not saying that's what happened. It's just how I'm experiencing it. All right. So at the moment, what I'm doing, I'm starting to experience is a lot of anger and frustration, and I'm experiencing being shouted at. And I'm not saying you're doing it. I'm just saying that that's how I'm experiencing it. So you're taking ownership of the experience. So it's not you doing it, it's me experiencing it. Be sure that you stick to the facts. So what I experienced was you arriving late yesterday, and I experienced you arrived late 2 days ago, all right, or 3 days ago. At no stage during this step should you blame or judge. Avoid statements such as, you make me feel it was your fault when you are to blame. Why don't you ever? All right, so this is all the way back to not making the person feel like they're the one that's at fault. All right. So I have a particular family member who there's been some really tough conversations in the last couple of years with this particular individual. And I've really had to work hard at, when I engage with them, engaging from a perception of what I'm experiencing is this situation. I'm experiencing a lot of pushback. I'm experiencing a lot of argumentation, etc. I'm experiencing not being listened to. And I'm not saying that you're not listening to me. I'm saying that I experience it as not being listened to. So we really are taking ownership for the experience that we are having of the situation. Okay. The second point is to take ownership of how that experience that you are having is making you feel. When I experience that, it makes me feel frustrated, angry, or upset. Okay, remember that this is not how the other person is making you feel. Instead, it's just the emotions that you are feeling as a result of what you're experiencing. Back to the diagram that we looked at earlier, it's your stories that are creating your emotions. And so we are putting our story, this is my story, this is what I'm experiencing, and this is how it's making me feel. And I'm not saying you're making me feel that way, it's just how I am feeling. All right. So if we were approaching someone who we've really had difficult conversations with in the past, previously when we have had conversations, my experience is that the conversation seems to have always gone off track. And my experience is that we've always left the conversation being quite angry and frustrated with each other. And I've experienced this on a number of occasions. And when that happens, it makes me actually feel quite frustrated and quite hurt and quite annoyed, in actual fact. And I'm not saying that it's what you're doing in the conversation, it's just how I experience the conversations we've been having. All right, so it's a very useful way of not making them the fault, but just saying, I'm experiencing this, I'm feeling this. All right, point number 3.
Yeah, and I think, Colin, before you move to point number 3, I'm just based on an observation that when someone talks about their experience, it's very hard to refute a person's experience because it's their reality. It's how they have actually gone through that particular situation, though it may be different from, the other person. Same situation, both of them in the same situation, each will experience it differently. So I think it's really difficult for one to actually say, oh, but that's not how it happened, because each person will be experiencing that differently.
Absolutely. And what we're wanting to do is to not provoke reaction. We don't want to connect with that person's ego, because if we express it wrong, they immediately, yeah, but I don't do that. I never did that. You know, when did that happen? Give me an example. They immediately, whoa, hold on a second. I'm not saying you did anything. All I'm saying is, this is what I experienced. And it's my experience that's causing me to feel that. It's got nothing to do with it. It's just where I'm at. And I'm just sharing that with you. The step number 3 is to, and this is quite an interesting one, because what we're doing is we're sharing with the other person the common goal. Not the goal of this conversation. What is my overall goal? And I'm sorry, I'm going to be caught in going back to an example I've used before. If my wife and I are arguing about how to discipline the children, we actually have the same goal. We want well-balanced, well-brought up, well-behaved, disciplined children. We're actually both on the same side. We just have different ways of doing this. And so honey, you know, when James misbehaves, what I've experienced is you don't hold him accountable, or he's not being held accountable. He's allowed to get away with murder, etc. And when that happens, I really start feeling a little bit anxious and frustrated. You know, in actual fact, both of us actually want the same thing. We want well-being. And so how can we achieve that? So it says they express what you need, or the outcome, the overall goal to be of the relationship, the purpose of the relationship. A manager could sit down with an employee and say, you know, in actual fact, you're now on the same side. I desperately want you and need you to perform at your full potential, and so does the team. And I'm sure you're wanting to perform at your full potential. You're wanting to be successful and to achieve and to, you know, I'm sure we're actually on the same side on this thing, all right? And it says they remember that this is not what you want the other person to do or to stop doing. Once again, we're taking ownership for what we need from the situation, from the overall relationship, from the outcome. So I really do want to be a value-adding member of your team. I'm proud of what we've achieved up till now, and I'd really like to see this continuing. How could we, however, this is not working for me at the moment, or the work that you've produced in the last week is not up to standard, and we need to talk about how we can find a way to correct this, because in actual fact, we're on the same side. And it is such a valuable tool, this, because we're expressing our experience of the situation and how we are feeling. And then we are seeking what is the mutual goal, because 99% of the time there is a mutual goal in the relationship. I actually want this relationship to be successful. I want us to have a high performance team and a high performance conference. I'd like us to build a culture of having tough conversations so that we can be honest and open. And I'm sure you want the same thing. And we can check with the other person. Oh, that's a point of commonality. And that really kind of segues us and moves us into point number 4, was to say, and if that's our overall goal, number 4, and so what could we do to make that happen in the future? Okay, so we're asking the person that we're speaking to partner with us in co-creating the outcome or the result that we mutually want to achieve. Okay, this is a genuine request to work together against the problem rather than against one another. What can we do to prevent this happening again in future? How can we work together to avoid these mistakes? What do you need from me in order to facilitate this? And can I share with you what it is that I need from you? All right. Back to my argument with my wife. All right, so how could we be having this conversation differently? How can we prevent the conversation from sliding into a blame game and who's right and who's wrong, and us both walking away feeling uncomfortable? What do you need from me in the conversation in order to have that happen? And so can I share with you what it is that I need from you? And can we commit to those things? Now we're moving forward, because we're all of a sudden solution focused, which is one of the building blocks. We're taking responsibility. We're not blaming, and we're not becoming attached to being right. If you have a look at all those 11 building blocks, every single one of them sits in this tool. And then finally, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to reaffirm the actions, because we need to move to action. I'm going to remind the team, change only happens ever when people do things differently to what they did them before, or how they did them before. But it's in the difference that the discomfort sits, because there's no evidence to prove it's a good idea to do it that way. So how can we do this differently? How can we come up with a new way of doing this? And can we commit to that? So what have we committed to? Why don't you just share with me what you've committed to that's going forward, and I'll share with you what I committed to you in support of you to achieve that. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and do that. 2 weeks down the track, we've got the same problem arises again. Hey, this is what I'm experiencing. And I'm now starting to feel really upset about this. Remember, I genuinely want this to work out. We had a conversation about what it is that we could do. Could we find different ways? Because that doesn't seem to be working. And I know that we made commitments, and I sense that those commitments, we're not sticking to those commitments. How could we do this different? So it creates a new opportunity for another conversation. And what we do is we just keep rotating this thing. As a manager, we may become increasingly task orientated in the way we have that conversation, all right, or with children or with whoever it is. When we see repeated bad behavior or poor performance, we just ramp up the level of, but always owning how we're experiencing it, owning how we feel, them not doing it, committed to the overall purpose, looking for solutions and actions and ways of getting around this, and really, really interrogating. Number 4 is the place where the real work's done. And then finally, and so what am I committed to doing? More, 2 opportunities pop up here. And I know that it is 1 minute past 7, but I need to share them quickly.
Okay.
Number 1, also a very useful tool to ask others. So Amor, I could come to you and say, Amor, what did you experience? And when you experienced that, how did you feel? And what are your overall goals? And how can we find a solution, and what are we going to commit to doing? So we can use it as a way of probing someone else, not only sharing our own, where we're coming from when we engage in the conversation, but we can use it to encourage others to do the same. The other thing is we can use the same tool on ourselves. Hey, what am I experiencing? How did I experience that? And how is it making me feel? And what do I need and want from the situation? And so who am I going to have to be, and what am I going to have to do in order to do that? And what am I going to commit to doing? You're using exactly the same tool. You're almost coaching yourself. All right. All right, let me stop talking, because I haven't given too much space to you or to our colleagues and friends to share their views.
Because you're so passionate about what you're talking about, Colin. And I see there's a couple of comments that I want to read before we allow for any questions or contributions. And the first one, I think, is the one that C made. I know who you are, C. And I think it was when you were referring to talking about intentions, making sure what your intentions are, or making clear what your intentions are as part of your preparation. And I know that C said something along the lines of, so C said, I guess being truthful and honest about your intention is important here in that preparation part and coming into the conversation. And then I saw that, you know, when you were talking about reaffirming here, that C also made reference to, you know, getting your ego in check and, you know, and sit ego. And
Yes.
Michelle just sort of agreeing with that. And then finally, one last comment from Takatani, based on the statement that you made around change. You know, change is when you do things differently. This sounds like a very simple phrase, but it's so profound.
Yeah. Okay, so I love the idea of sit ego, like a sit, behave, stay. We can't control our ego, so we just need to be conscious about it. But I love this idea. Change is when you do things differently. This sounds very like a simple phrase, and it sounds simple, but it's not necessarily easy. And it's not easy because there's no evidence to prove that doing something differently is going to be a good idea. And that's when we really need to lean into the discomfort of doing something that's out of our comfort zone, in the possibility that it could be extraordinary, but expecting nothing. Because if we expect it to be successful, we're going to be disappointed when it's not, and then we get upset and then we give up. It is profound. That's the only place where real change happens. And so I've got a question to ask this whole team as we venture into the festive season and time to relax and family time, etc. And so what's that one conversation that you're going to courageously go and have after tonight, after this evening session? And what is it that you could do differently in that conversation? How could you show up authentically and use these tools effectively in order to have that conversation, so that you can go into the festive season or into the holiday season with that baggage parked and dealt with and have closure on that? I really encourage you to do that.
Thanks,
So,
Colin.
Jamal, would you
And
like to wrap up?
Yeah, I'm actually quite conscious of time, but I think in wrapping up, we'd really love to keep this conversation going. So this recording will be available on our YouTube channel and on many other platforms. So please feel free to ask your questions there, give your contributions, give any reflections that you may come through. We've enjoyed getting your input in the chat box and getting your engagements in this session. However, I'd like to share something with you. So in February 2022, which might seem far away, but is not so far, we'll be having our very first Wisdom Live event, similar to a masterclass. So please look out for more details in early January around how long the Wisdom Live will be, how much it will cost, how many participants can actually be part of the Wisdom Live. And this particular Wisdom Live will be around enabling conversation with yours truly, Colin Kuhn. So I think if you've enjoyed this series, you'll definitely enjoy and find so much value in the Wisdom Live that's coming up in February 2022. And I think from my side, I just want to say, Colin, thank you so much for the last 4 weeks, for your investment in this series, for showing up and for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. We appreciate you. We appreciate what you've done. And for the people that have been with us and those that are joining us for the first time today, thank you for taking time out on this evening to spend time with us wherever you may be in any part of the world. We appreciate you. We thank you. And we wish you a happy and fruitful and restful festive season. Thank you all so much. Please remember to go and like and share and subscribe to our YouTube video, as well as go to our website, www.boundlesswisdom.com. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy your festive season.
Thanks, Amal.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.